First to Canberra, where the Prime Minister Julia Gillard has warned that even if Australia's main military mission in Afghanistan can be wound down by 2014, an Australian presence would be needed at least until 2020. In the first formal parliamentary debate on the issue, despite the deaths of 21 soldiers since Australia's commitment began 9 years ago, both major party leaders voiced strong bipartisan support for Australian troops to stay the course and said the goal was to ensure Afghanistan never again became a safe haven for terrorists. In a moment I'll be talking with Defence Minister Stephen Smith, but first this report from political editor Heather Hewitt in Canberra.
Outside Parliament House, a small, lonely demonstration against Australia's defence mission in Afghanistan. Media crews outnumbered protesters.
Prime Minister Gillard must like funerals. Endless war means endless funerals.
And as the parliamentary debate on Afghanistan loomed, one Liberal MP kept up his resistance to towing the party line.
I'd like to see our troops back home within months. If we cannot get some consensus to solve this by getting a group of people that are going to give some stability in government that we can hand the forces over to with some level of responsibility and stability, then we should exit.
But during a grilling before a Senate Estimates Committee this morning, Defence Force Chief Angus Houston wasn't having a bar of any suggestion Australian troops should pull out. Nor would he cop any calls to increase the number of soldiers serving there.
With the task that's been defined for us, I think the 1550 is about right.
And in a prepared statement that was clearly for the ears of the opposition, he issued a staunch defence of the Army's treatment of 3 soldiers charged over a deadly raid in Afghanistan. The opposition leader Tony Abbott had argued last week the government wasn't doing enough to look after their legal interests.
Consistent with the presumption of innocence, I assure you that the members charged are receiving the full support of the Australian Defence Force. The Chief of the Army has gone to unprecedented lengths to ensure that every possible support measure, including legal, administrative, medical, psychological and chaplaincy and welfare assistance, is made available to these soldiers and their families.
Government ministers and defence experts have insisted it's not the role of government to intervene in such matters. But Tony Abbott is clinging to the claim that it is, and said so when the much-heralded debate on Afghanistan finally got underway in the House of Representatives late this afternoon.
Our questions were for the government, which needed to explain what it has done to ensure that these soldiers have the best possible defence.
By and large, though, as expected, the debate was a bipartisan effort with both sides declaring their strong support for the mission in Afghanistan. Before a packed and solemn chamber, they also supported having the debate itself.
Mr Speaker, the international community has been in Afghanistan a long time, 9 years. The Australian people are entitled to know what we are trying to achieve and when our troops can come home.
It's right that the Parliament should now debate our commitment. First, because something as grave as a serious military campaign should be justified to the Parliament.
That's why today I announce as Prime Minister that I will make a statement like this one to the House each year that our Afghanistan involvement continues.
21 combat deaths and 152 combat injuries so far make this our most serious fight since Vietnam, and Afghanistan has been the central front in the most important civilisational struggle of our times.
Why then hasn't there been a parliamentary debate on this before? The fact is it's the Greens who foisted it on the major parties during negotiations to form a minority government. 9 years on and 21 soldiers killed since our commitment began, it's only now that the people's elected representatives have their say on the floor of both houses.
Mr Speaker, Australia has 2 vital interests in Afghanistan. One, to make sure that Afghanistan never again becomes a safe haven for terrorists, a place where attacks on us and our allies begin. 2, to stand firmly by our alliance commitment to the United States, formally invoked following the attacks on New York and Washington in 2001.
After 9 years of inconclusive fighting, the risk is that the PR war will be lost at a time when the ground war is finally starting to go better. Immediately at stake is the cause for which those 21 Australians have given their lives. Ultimately at stake is the West's ability to assert itself against deadly threats before they have materialised into another September the 11th style atrocity or something even worse.
If the insurgency in Afghanistan were to succeed, if the international community were to withdraw, then Afghanistan could once again become a safe haven for terrorists.
A premature end to our involvement would tell the Americans and the British that Australia is an unreliable ally and a fair-weather friend.
Australia will not abandon Afghanistan, but we must be very realistic about the future. Transition will take some years. We will be engaged through this decade at least.
While the Prime Minister stressed Australia's defence commitment is not open-ended, and Tony Abbott agreed, it's clearly not about to end in a hurry. Both leaders know that means more loss of life. They're acutely aware the patience of the Australian community may be running out, and during the debate repeatedly referred to the loss of life so far.
We have honoured their deaths by continuing their campaign. How worthwhile would these deaths now seem if the Australian government were to abandon the cause for which they died?
Mr Speaker, in conclusion, attending funerals for Australian soldiers is the hardest thing I have ever done, and it's nowhere near as hard for me as it is for the families. There's nothing I can say to change their long walk through life without a loved one lost for our sake. In the ultimate, I can promise them only this: we will remember them.
Political editor Heather Ewart.